Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So, COVID-19, everyone's been staying at home and something has been taking off. And I think it's been taking off for a while, but I think it's taken off more than ever, and that's podcasting. And so I wanted to find out a little bit more about it, how you do it, how you become successful at it, because lots of you have been trying it, talking about it, and asking about it. So I want to introduce you tonight to Amanda Cupido. She's the author of Let's Talk Podcasting, the essential guide to getting it right. Amanda, thank you for joining us. How are you?
Great. Thank you so much for having me. Always happy to talk podcasting.
So you've been doing this for 15 years. I didn't even know podcasting existed 15 years ago.
I know, it's only picked up in popularity, I think, to this level in recent years, but the first wave of podcasting dates back to around 2004 in the traditional sense that we know of it now, mainly because of Apple Podcasts bringing out RSS feeds and allowing people to upload and download audio the way that we are doing now and stream it. And fun fact, podcast was the word of the year in 2005. So that's when I would say
podcast was the word of the year in 2005. Well, yeah. I was obviously not listening to the words of the year that year.
Yeah, so it does date back, but obviously it's evolved a lot since then.
So first of all, how did you get into it, and what are your podcasts about today?
So my background's in radio and journalism. So I've always been a lover of audio and audio storytelling. I went to Ryerson University and graduated from there, taking their radio documentary class. And so that's when I started. I was my early days in the industry. I was working at News Talk 1010 CFRB, and I was making podcasts on the side professionally. But even when I was a student, I was making podcasts. So I guess I've been doing it since around 2007. But at the time, I was just, getting to know the medium and playing around with it. And to be honest, was a bit of extra money for me when I was working in radio. I started to really take it seriously in studying the industry around 2012 to 2014. We saw a lot of shifts in the industry then. That's when we saw Gimlet come out in the US, who's now, a powerhouse production company, which was acquired by Spotify in 2019. So I was following them from their inception, and that's when I started to really notice, hey, there's something here, and I think this is going to pick up even more. So I started thinking about branded podcasts at the time, what podcasts could do for students, for leaders, for some of the clients I was working with. In around that time in 2014, I was at a digital content agency who was focused on producing video. And I was the one to be like, maybe we should start producing audio as well. And so I was able to build out a branded podcast vertical at MediaFace is the name of the Toronto agency. And so ever since then, it's been full steam ahead. I came out with my book in 2018, and I've been teaching since then as well at Seneca and Ryerson. So the podcasts that I'm producing now are mainly for thought leaders and organizations that are trying to position themselves as thought leaders in their industry. And so they're branded podcasts. We take a real journalistic approach to creating the content, make sure that audiences don't feel like they're listening to a giant ad. So I've produced ones for like Cisco about cybersecurity. I produced one for Ryerson about current affairs topics and the Think Labs they have going on in the research that's coming out of the school. And I've produced two for the Globe and Mail, one about personal finance, one about food. So a wide range of topics, but all really fun and really, really great experiences.
So I was at a conference on the future of the internet just before COVID-19 happened, actually, down in New York, and was with the CEO of, I think it was Vimeo and video service. And I told her that I'm on AM radio every night at 6 o'clock. And she said, what? AM radio? And she said, not into video. And it was interesting. She said, and I have no idea whether these statistics are right or not, but what she said was that 15% of internet traffic today is video, 85% is text and otherwise. But she said she thinks within a few years it would be 85% video. And then she actually did an interview back last summer. She said, what I thought was going to happen in a few years has happened in a few months, and video is taking over. What do you think?
Yeah, I think video is definitely still very relevant. And I don't think there's something that's more superior when you're comparing audio versus versus video. I even don't even like to compare podcast versus radio, which a lot of people like to do. I think it's all different mediums, and depending on what you're sharing, you should pick a medium that translates best. And so sometimes we see companies, people doing video when it doesn't actually make sense to do video. They're doing video for the sake of video, and that's what I hate. And so sometimes I work with a lot of thought leaders who are like new to broadcasting, maybe haven't done an interview before. If you're trying to get into the interview space, podcasting is a much better gateway rather than jumping in with both video and audio. It's more to worry about. You have your guests also concerned with how they look like. So it changes the vibe of the entire thing. And so what I recommend is like for people to really pick which one they think is going to serve their needs. Do you have visuals that are imperative to the story you're telling? And yeah, maybe video is better for you. But do you have powerful audio that you want to be able to do remotely without sacrificing quality, or that maybe you're going to be able to get better content from the interview if you focus on just audio? If that's the case, then maybe like podcasting is better. As far as listenership goes, again, I don't think you could even compare video to audio, because a lot of people who are watching video, it's screen time. And the reason why podcasts, especially now, I think have shot up in popularity is that people are overwhelmed with screen time. You hear the word Zoom fatigue all the time. And so podcasts provide an alternate medium. It's not necessarily a competitor, but it's just a different way of consuming content that might meet people where they're at.
We're chatting tonight with Amanda Cupido, who is the author of Let's Talk Podcasting, the essential guide to getting it right. We're going to take a break and come back more with Amanda in just a minute. Stay with us.
Hello.
Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio, or Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Amanda Cupido. She's the author of Let's Talk Podcasting, the essential guide to getting it right. Amanda, you said you started 15 years ago. You must have been really a pioneer in podcasting in Ontario, Toronto, Canada.
Yeah, I mean, I won't take credit for being a pioneer in the industry of it as a whole by any means, but yeah, I was definitely one of the first to be championing it and to really be loving it in that time. In 2007, I was still a student at Ryerson University taking journalism, and I was interning with a magazine. This was the first podcast I created, and I created it for them. Even though I had been brought on as a writer, I was trying to like push the boundaries and experiment with the medium. So that was really exciting. And then even in school, my assignments were mostly radio documentary themed or writing themed. And I remember creating a podcast as part of my final assignment, not even for marks. I just did it as a bonus add-on. And my teachers were like, what? But I was just really looking to experiment with the medium. And so I found I was kind of the person who was explaining to my peers, what is a podcast? And to my teachers even. But it just goes to show how much things have changed since now I'm teaching podcasting at Ryerson. So,
but when you teach it or in your book, what are some of the suggestions you give people?
Yeah, so I think some of the big takeaways, I get a lot of questions when I'm doing workshops or teaching about like, how long should a podcast be and what day of the week should I release it? And these are kind of the questions that I think are not actually the questions that you should be thinking about right off the bat when you're trying to start it. Those are little tactical things, and actually there's no set answer to either of those questions. Where I tell people to start is think about what is important for you to say, and specifically you. Right? We have so many podcasts out there. We think, numbers are above the 800,000 mark for how many podcasts are out there. And you want to be able to offer something niche. That's the beauty of podcasts, is that people are able to come together around really specific topics that might not get traditional radio airtime. And so first off, I think about like, what are you sharing? And is there an audience for that? Start there. And then number two, the format that's best to share that information. So again, a lot of people default to this chat cast, which maybe they've heard on the radio, like this show, or they've heard from other podcasts like the Rogan show, it's a great format and it works in a lot of areas, but it doesn't work in all areas. And so sometimes, I've worked with a healthcare practitioner who is he himself is one of the number one experts on turmeric in Canada. And so I said, he was like going to do interviews. And I was like, good, but also we could showcase your knowledge, which you have. I actually don't think you're going to interview anyone who's more of an expert than you. Maybe the show is just you and it's shorter clips and it's not a half-hour conversation, right? And it's actually you just presenting the information in a really engaging way. Let's talk about how we could do that, right? So I just try to encourage people to think about what's the best way to tell the story or the information that they're wanting to share, and be creative with it. It is a wild, wild west out there right now with what's being created. And I really encourage people to lean in, listen to other shows, get inspired, and try new formats. Because we're seeing a lot of new ones emerging that are quite exciting and taking off.
So my show is an hour long every night, Monday through Friday, 6 o'clock. I'm the drive home guy in Mississauga. Minus commercials, it ends up being like 47 minutes. And if I have one guest, I find that people don't listen to the whole show. If I have 2 or 3 guests, I get different people tuning in at different times. Is that interest or time, or what have you learned about it? Is there a best time, best length for a podcast?
Yeah, so I think it's totally fair question. And I think this is one of those important moments to distinguish the difference between radio and podcasting. That kind of listenership, or like listener journey, as I like to call it, in radio is very normal, right? That's not just your show. I think that's pretty widespread. People will tune in for specific people. They might be listening where they know someone's coming on at a certain time. They'll tune in for that. But with podcasts, because people are committing to the episode, have either downloaded it or clicking on it to stream, we see that actually people who commit to an episode, if they get past the first couple seconds, like usually if they make it past the first 10 seconds, they are likely to listen to the entire episode. People, once they know that they like a show or they like a host, they are very committed, and we see listenership, listening time much longer than radio. And it doesn't actually matter how long the podcast is. It means that they've built a trust and a cadence with that show, and they're ready to sit through it. We see that some people are listening on fast speed, which is also something that would never happen in radio, but people will put their podcast on either 2 times faster, and they can listen, and that's how they digest more information. They're able to also stick through it maybe in the same amount of time that they would have for how long they would have tuned into your radio show. So there are some of these little things that happen that go against getting hung up on a specific time. But what I like to say is, yes, a lot of podcasts we're seeing hover around the 20 to 40 minute mark per episode, but it really depends on the format. I think that 20 to 40 minute mark is indicative of, good content for that long. And so what I tell people is, don't get hung up on a time. Get hung up with how long is it going to take you to tell the story properly, or to have an engaging conversation. We're not going to stretch it for the sake of hitting a time, and we're not going to, say goodbye because we got to rush to traffic, right? Like, this is you giving the story the time it deserves. And that's one of the beautiful things about podcasting, and one of the main differences between podcasting and radio.
And again, this may not be fair given that it's a radio program, but also I publish all the shows as podcasts. I sometimes interview one person, like today, when I'm going to be interviewing you. Other times I'll have a group of people that I interview at the same time and go back and forth and have a little bit of a discussion. And then what the radio station really wants me to do more often is have my own commentary, my own editorial sort of at the end of the show, because they find that more people are tuning in because they get to know me and want to hear the personal view. What's your point of view on that? Do people want to have multiple voices, an interview, or commentary?
Yeah, great question. And all of this to say, I want to preface this with that I still love radio. I will always love radio. And I don't think it's dying. It's just really different. So we know that with podcasts, people bond really intimately with their hosts, which sometimes happens, especially in talk radio, but maybe not so much with FM radio, right? This is why hosts have to slate their names and slate their show every 19 seconds, So that's not the case with podcasts, because we are seeing that audiences are committed and coming back, and they know what they're listening to. One common mistake, if any of you are radio people out there and wanting to make the transition to podcasting, I hear a lot of radio hosts slating themselves and slating their show really often within their podcast, but it's not needed. It's one of the other differences between the two. You have someone clicking, not just scrolling through their dashboard and landing on something and not knowing what they're listening to. They know what they're listening to. So you could slate it at the top and the end, and that's it. But with regard to how many guests makes most sense, I think it really depends on the hosts themselves and the topic. So you have commentary and you can carry that conversation on your own for a bit. Same with that doctor I was talking about who was speaking about turmeric. He didn't actually need a guest. And so in those cases, commentary is fine and people will listen. We see Hardcore History. I always love to use this example. That is a podcast with basically a history lecturer who speaks for 3 hours by himself, nonstop, and like no guests. And he has a huge following. And so again, if you would have pitched that to me in theory, I would have said that's not going to work, but it does. So there's people who will listen to stuff like that if they're super interested in what you're sharing, the topics he's talking about, the stories he's telling. But then there's, the turmeric episode I did, those episodes were like 5 to 10 minutes. And that's just, we're not going to stretch it longer than that. And that's all he needed. But in the end of the day, you just want to make sure the content is great. If a guest is going to really push the conversation forward and really add to it, then you're going to want to have them on. And if you think by yourself, just doing commentary is enough to keep audiences engaged, then lean into that. There's no right or wrong.
So my podcast is on SoundCloud and on YouTube. Do you have a recommendation as to the right vehicles?
All right, so this is a big question too, and a lot of people can feel overwhelmed by how to share their podcast. So right now, SoundCloud, for those of you who don't know what that is, that's basically the YouTube of audio. You can upload clips and they can be streamed online, and there's a whole database of people who are uploading stuff. So that's great, and that's actually how I started sharing my first podcast. But if you want to get them on the players, a lot of people don't realize that it's actually free. All you have to do is submit your RSS feed link. So this is a link that's kind of pulling all of your updates into one spot so that it's a feed. And if someone wants to subscribe, it gives people the ability to subscribe and get episodes automatically onto their device. So SoundCloud's a good starting place for you to host your audio. And then if you want to share it on like places like Spotify and Apple Podcasts, it's all free. You would just submit your RSS feed link individually to each platform. But there are some other hosting sites that make it a bit easier. You do have to pay. So for instance, one of them is called Libsyn. They're one of the ones that have been around. They were true pioneers in the space. They've been around forever. And so basically you upload all your audio there. It is hosted there. A basic plan costs about like $5 a month. And then you just click a button and it goes to they submit the RSS feed and it goes to all of the platforms for you, and they consolidate your stats for you. So it does make it a bit easier if you're trying to put out a professional podcast.
What's that one called?
Libsyn, Libsyn. And there's also a free one called Anchor that a lot of new people might get involved with. There is a little bit of, it's free, in which that means if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. And so there is some things to negotiate with that if you're trying to sell ads, and just some fine print you should read up on. But again, a great place to start. And then YouTube, I wanted to comment on. So many people ask me, should I be putting my podcast up on YouTube? Number one, again, the moment you incorporate video element to your show, it changes the pace, tone, the feel of the show. So you just have to be intentional on whether or not that's what's best for you. But we do see that a lot of people listen to podcasts on YouTube. So it's definitely not a bad idea, but it has to be an intentional one. And make sure that, your video looks great. You and your guests are comfortable on screen, and you're not sacrificing the audio. The moment that I say that you think that the audio might get sacrificed, I say it's not worth it. Focus on getting really good audio.
Okay, so my main source of distribution is through the radio, but the radio also puts it on a podcast, and then also the same content ends up getting produced as video on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and places like that. So using the exact same material in more than one spot, does that make sense?
It's a great thing to do. I highly recommend it. Repurposing content and tailoring it for the platform that it's going to go on is brilliant. I think this is where a lot of companies may actually lose money, because they're creating individual content, have different teams working on different things. But then on the opposite end of the spectrum, we see some people who make something and then they just put it up everywhere in the exact same way. And actually it doesn't work as well on social media than it does on YouTube, right? So it's all about being intentional with how you're sharing and on what platforms and what that platform was built for. So for Instagram, you know, you're going to want a shorter clip. You're going to want to put Instagram to this day. I mean, I say this in almost every interview. The social media platforms have not caught up with the podcasting boom. You cannot upload an audio file to social media, any social media platform. It's crazy to me. And I just hope that there's a developer listening to me at one of these interviews and start working on this. They must be, though. Anyway, so right now we're in a place where you have to convert your audio to a video in order to upload it on social media. So even that alone, it's an extra step, an intentional one that has to happen. And then you want to just make sure that you're creating that video to speak to the platform you're sharing it on. So if it is Instagram, you know, you want to know, am I doing a 1-minute clip to go on the feed, or am I going to do an Instagram TV longer piece of video that's going to go up and stay up as a highlights reel or whatever, right? So you just got to be intentional with it.
Where do you think this business is going?
I think it's still going up. And I know people say there's like a podcast bubble and it's going to burst, but I don't think we're even close to that yet. Even if you just look at something like YouTube's trajectory, you know, video was shooting up and it still continues to be really, you know, users are still uploading many videos. Many people are making money off it, finding new ways to make money from it. And so I kind of see podcasting following a similar trajectory as that. From the research I've seen, you know, we started tracking listenership just in general, like who's a podcast listener on a monthly, on a weekly basis. And those numbers have just been climbing year to year. But what I find the most interesting, and maybe people don't talk about enough, is that they started doing research on, okay, let's dig a little deeper on the podcast listener, on someone who is a listener. Now it's not just, do you listen, yes or no? If you're a yes, how much are you listening? And then also following that person in their year-to-year listening trajectory. And what we've seen is that people who are podcast listeners are still on the up and up with how much they listen year to year. So someone who said, I listen on a weekly basis turned into someone who said, I'm listening on a, you know, twice a week, then every day of the week. And then once we even hit the person's listenership path, like hit every day of the week, their year to year is that they're listening more every day a week. We haven't plateaued yet with the listenership. So I think once that happens, then we can probably start predicting what the next wave will be. But right now we're still like skyrocketing upwards.
What does podcast replace? Is it replacing radio? Is it replacing TV watching? Is it replacing talking to your spouse? What's it replacing?
Yeah. I think it's replacing a number of things. And that's one of the biggest misconceptions, which I mentioned in the beginning. People are like, oh, podcasts versus radio. They love to just compare the two. And it's like, actually, a lot of research shows that people are listening to podcasts while they're at home doing nothing else. That's the number one category of how people listen to podcasts. And so in that instance, it's actually competing with like Netflix and other entertainment video streaming services. They're not listening to it on the commute necessarily. I mean, they are, but you know, it's not necessarily replacing radio. I think it definitely competes with radio. Number two is listening while you're commuting. But part of the reason too is that you can download an episode and listen while you're on the subway underground, right? Where you have no reception, where it would have been hard to listen. You're not replacing radio in that instance either, right? It's actually replacing music or an audiobook or reading, right? So I think it's actually replacing a lot of things depending on where people are listening. But I definitely would say, yeah, taking a chunk out of people's reading time, screen time in general, like videos and streaming services, radio a bit for sure. And I also think it's like it's taking up its own space where a lot of people I talk to have mentioned that they listen to it as they're getting ready in the morning. And maybe they would have just been listening to nothing before. So, right. So it's filling out the app on its own.
We're chatting tonight with Amanda Cupido. She's the author of Let's Talk Podcasting, the essential guide to getting it right. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Amanda in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960. We're chatting about podcasting tonight with Amanda Cupido. She's the author of Let's Talk Podcasting, the essential guide to getting it right. Amanda, when did you release your book?
Came out in 2018.
And can I still get it on Amazon or something?
Yes, definitely. You could go to letstalkpodcasting.com and you could see all the places you can get it. Amazon, Indigo. It's available a bunch of places.
But the most important question, is it available as a podcast?
This is horrible. It's not yet. I keep saying I should do an audiobook and I have not gotten around to it. I know it's very, it seems ironic, but I do have transcripts of stuff in the book, and there are audio elements that kind of connect to the book. So there are audio pieces that go hand in hand with it if you.
So I guess the other big question about how do you actually do a podcast is, can you make money at it? So what's the business model of podcasting?
Yeah, so this is an interesting topic because there's so many different business models and ones that are still being experimented with and emerging. But what I like to say when I'm speaking to individuals who are trying to start a podcast, there's really 3 different ways you can go about it. The first one is by building a Patreon. And so basically this is like a Kickstarter sort of, financial sourcing of money from users who are really loving the product, or in this case, the podcast. So a lot of podcasters use Patreon. They put a call out at the end of their episodes for anyone to donate money if they are enjoying the show. Usually there's no set costs, and people are actually paying even just like $2 a month for for a show they really love. But podcasters who have grown their audiences have really made a living off of this. And so it's amazing to see people who have a full-time job based on their Patreons. And what's great about that model is that it's not like you have one big sponsor. If one listener drops out and stops paying their $2 a month, it doesn't actually make a big dent. And you're able to build a really sustainable, long-lasting, monthly subscription service that will continue funding you as long as you continue to produce and respond to your audiences. So that's factor number one. Of course, that one takes time though. And so that's key. You've got to be willing to stick with it for a while to build that base.
And Patreon, is that just a term, or is there a website that you can go to?
That is the company website. Yeah. I'm sure if you just search Patreon, I'm sure it'll come up. So like Patreon, Patreon. And so, yeah, that's one. It's a very specific service, and it's kind of built it. Like now I feel like it's really been taken over by podcasters. So I wouldn't be surprised if podcasts were the main users of that service. The second model is by selling ads. And so this would be, your focus is to build an audience and then try to sell advertising spots within your podcast. And so now a lot of people ask, like, how much can I make from ads? And it really depends. First off, just know that if you have a niche topic and you go to an advertiser that is speaking directly to your niche audience, you can charge a premium. There's like no set number you can charge. So for instance, I like to use the example of, there's a podcast called Sleep With Me, and it helps people fall asleep. And so obviously everyone listening is having trouble falling asleep. And guess who the advertisers are? It is like mattress companies. It is people who are helping specifically with sleep patterns. So of course, that kind of a connection is so perfect. And it's your target demo is basically everyone. So you could charge a premium. The matchup is that on point, which also goes to why I said you should probably pick a niche topic. Really bodes well with this model. And then also there's a difference between baked-in ads and dynamic ads. And so if you have a baked-in ad, that means your ad is going to be in that episode forever. Again, you could kind of charge a premium for that. Dynamic ads means you're going to be like swapping out the ads and selling it for a specific amount of time, which is like what radio does. And then also there's 3 spots to put ads: in the beginning, in the middle, which is known as a mid-roll, and then at the end. And so the mid-roll is the most valuable because you're getting listeners who are probably not skipping over the intro. They're in the middle of the episode, and they're going to listen to it. They're very likely to listen to it. The highest chance to listen through the whole thing. So, typically, I hate throwing out exact numbers because, again, all of those factors will change it. But usually when we're talking about ad sales, you're selling ads based on CPM, which is per 1,000 listeners. And those will typically go for like a mid-roll. You're looking at like $25 to $30 per CPM per episode. So you'll have to do some math on that. But, it does sound low, but if you have a larger audience number, it can go up really quickly. If it's in the middle, right? If it's baked in, if it's niche audience, you can kind of tag plus on top of that. The third model And the one that like I find it depends what you're doing. So this is the one, I team up with brands. So this one obviously speaks to me the most. But even as an individual, you can team up with a brand from the beginning. And so basically you're creating a joint venture podcast with an organization where it makes sense. So I've spoken to a lot of like yoga instructors who are like, I want to do a yoga podcast. Amazing. There are so many yoga studios and yoga associations that would love to be sharing content like this with their pre-existing audience, but they might not have the resources to make their own podcast. So if you're already integrated into a community, do some thinking, get creative with what organizations are out there that you could partner up with and potentially get some budget from, and do a joint venture. And especially if it's a topic you just love anyway, and it's just going to speak to their audiences really perfectly, and you're already part of that community. So I also encourage people to think about that. And it might not be as instinctual, but basically that's what I'm doing in my business, is partnering with organizations who want to make a podcast to speak to their pre-existing audiences. And so that's what I've been doing.
Now, what about, when does a podcast become like an infomercial? For an example, you've got a book. You're speaking to me about podcasting, and you're mentioning your book. I want to hear, and my listeners want to hear the content that you're providing. But when is it stop becoming an interview and starts to become an infomercial?
It's a very blurry line, and a lot of people have a hard time, jockeying that line. I think in the end of the day, you have to think about the audience first and the message kind of second. The message obviously is important, but it can't be the first thing that's coming out of your mouth and over and over and over again. I think if I was mentioning my book at the end of every answer here, people would start to get annoyed, right? But at the end of the day, I'm providing a lot of really tangible, specific information that is serving the audiences listening right now. And the book is just there as a bonus, as an add-on. And if you want to learn more, if you want to reach out to me, here's how you do it. And it's actually more of a gift to them, to give them an opportunity to learn more, right? It's not feeling like a giant ad. I would hope not. But I take that approach when I'm creating my episodes with the brands that I partner with as well. And so, I'll use Cisco as an example. We did a cybersecurity podcast, and it was connected. Obviously, they sell, web security services and programming and support, but the podcast wasn't talking about how amazing the support is. The podcast was talking about cybersecurity and big topics and issues that come up within cybersecurity. And they were providing information for business owners, from small businesses to enterprise levels. And that's the information, like positioning yourself as a thought leader, that you could speak to all these topics, and you have this wealth of information that you're ready and willing to share. And hey, you want to go deeper, here's where you can contact us. So I think you have to be really mindful of what the end product is and make sure it doesn't take over the content that's being shared on the podcast.
Okay. What about technology? Lots of people, want to launch a podcast, business, or just for a hobby. What recommendations do you have on computers, on microphones, on websites? I started using something called Audible. And then when COVID-19 occurred and I no longer could do live interviews with people, I switched to Zoom. What are your recommendations on all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think there's so much out there, and more is coming out, especially given the pandemic and the lockdown. But I can share what I use. So when I'm recording now, all of the ones I'm doing have no video elements. So that's already one thing to take note. I use a program called Clean Feed. There's a free version of it and a pro version of it. I've invested in the pro version, but the free version is great. And it connects people. There's nothing to download, which I really like. I know some people are just feel overwhelmed with downloading all these apps these days. It's just a link. And it connects you. The interface is very simplistic, but on purpose. You notice that if someone had bad internet and they were doing this video over Zoom, it might get choppy. Their video might start cutting out and not connecting with their audio. With Clean Feed, there's no video. It's a simple interface because they're putting all that bandwidth power towards getting the best audio. And I really like that. And there's also settings to help. So for instance, sometimes when people don't have headphones, there's an echo. There's a setting in there for that to kind of minimize echo and make sure you get the best audio while you're recording, rather than trying to fix it in post-production. So that's what I've been using a lot. And you can get as many people as you would like, or with the pro version you can. I'm not sure with the free one, but yeah, in the pro version, you can get as many people as you like on the line, and I get everyone an individual track that I can then edit afterwards. So that's what I'm using for as far as like an online connection goes. You'll see the mic that I'm using right now. This is called a USB mic because it's plugged into my computer. And this is a great starter mic. It goes for about $100.
It's massive. What's the benefit of it? It's massive. It's huge. What's the benefit of it?
Well, this has an arm. I don't know if you can see, but it has an arm on my desk. And so I can just swing it around and use it pretty quickly. And it has a pop filter. So this also helps prevent me like into the microphone and creating that kind of like popping sound effect. But this is kind of what I use for the day-to-day stuff. But when you're recording, if you're wanting to get more advanced, you would I would record on USB. Anytime you have a USB connection, you are losing a bit of quality with your mic. So you will see microphones that have an XLR, and I can just show you, actually, I happen to have it at the time. Here's one of the devices that I use for my remote recording and my own voiceover recording. This is an XLR connection. So you'll see it has like 3 prongs. And this is the highest quality of audio you're going to get when you have a microphone that has this kind of an output and goes into, this is a recorder, a Zoom H5. Yeah, I have the Zoom H5 and the Zoom H6. So I love Zoom, and don't get it mixed up with the Zoom web conferencing. But I do love Zoom recorders. So this allows me, I've been doing also phone interviews this way. So as you'll notice, I have the XLR to an audio jack, and I plug it into my phone, and I'm able to record phone interviews with this. But I'm also able to plug in a microphone into the bottom here and like hold it out or put it on a stand to get the highest quality. That would be like
once you've done that recording, how do you download it into the program that you're going to put on the computer?
Yeah, so this goes into an SD card, just like a digital camera would have, and then I just take the SD card out and put it on the computer, and drag and drop the files into my editor. So yeah, this one is going straight into my computer again. So if I'm needing something quick and I open up my editor, I just record straight into it. But if I'm doing something longer form or I'm needing higher quality, I'll go with something like that.
And what about editing? What editing program do you use?
So I use Adobe Audition, and I love it. But it does come with like a monthly subscription fee, and it does have like all the bells and whistles. So if someone's really new to editing, I would recommend starting with Audacity. It's free. You can download it on Mac or PC. That's how I started when I was doing my early podcasts. But then I eventually migrated to using Adobe Audition. This is what we used at the radio station and what I used in my final years in school, and I've continued to use it. And they're really, what I love too is that Adobe is, they're not paying me to say this, but are really committed to serving podcasters. They're at every conference that I've gone to, and they're actually in the midst of developing, I don't know, yeah, well, we'll just share that they're in the midst of developing something to help automate the podcast production process, which I'm really excited to see. So people can stay tuned for that.
Awesome. And what about if you're using video? Is there an editor you prefer for video?
Yeah, so I like Adobe products. So Adobe Premiere comes with the Adobe suite. So that's what I've used in the past for video editing. But if you are just looking for simple video editing, like to make your podcast, like I was talking about before, you can only put videos up on your social media feed. And so if you're wanting to just make a simple video like that turns your audio into a video, a short video, I use an app called Headliner. And this helps you upload your audio, you upload your podcast artwork, it mashes it all together. It automatically animates an audio line for you. So it's very easy to use, very user-friendly, and it's very, I think it's great for producing some of those shorter videos for social media.
So I found Zoom helpful because it gives me both an audio file as well as a video file.
Yep, and some people actually do this and don't use the video file at all. They just do it because they like to visually see the person they're interviewing, and then they just take the audio file and edit that. So there's a lot of different ways of doing it. And as long as someone has really strong internet connection and they're comfortable with Zoom, then this is a great option too.
Is there, alternatives to Zoom that do that kind of work? Like I see that a lot of the TV stations are using a Cisco product.
WebEx, yeah.
And then
Yeah,
you've got Microsoft Teams as well. What do you think about the different products?
Yeah, there's tons out there. Even Skype is a great option, which is like free, and a lot of people have that resource. So I recommend Skype for like real beginners who um, just want to start with something, especially even if they're overwhelmed by everything. Skype is at least familiar to most people, and Skype has allowed for like a recording option now, and it automatically sends you the video in the chat like seconds after you finish. I find that automated process is really nice and easy. You don't have to remember to like click download or anything. It just comes to you, and once again, you can just turn your videos off if you'd like to not have the video there and just use it as audio, or you can have the videos on and it'll give you a file similar to what you're getting from Zoom.
Now you've got a very fancy big microphone in front of you. I've seen a lot of people just with earpods or the old wire headphones.
Yeah, you can do it on that too. And what I say is if the content is really good, people are forgiving if the mic isn't the tip top, highest quality microphone. So especially if you're just starting off and you want to give it a go, you could record straight into your cell phone. You could put in, your typical earbuds that have a microphone, and you can use your recording. Like every phone has a voice recorder built into it. So you could definitely record your voiceover or your end of the conversation that way. It's a great way to start. And when I'm doing a lot of workshops, that's actually what I encourage people to do. Some phones, including mine, which is a Samsung, a lot of Androids will even have interview mode on their recorder. And that means it uses a microphone from the top and a microphone from the bottom. And you can literally position yourself in between the phone in between you and your guest, and get really great sounding audio from both people.
From both sides.
Yeah, you could definitely experiment with that.
What about the room? Do you have a recommendation? Do you want soundproofing in the room or anything like that?
Yes. So a small room is best. This is why you'll typically hear people or podcasters talk about recording in their closet. A small room with low ceilings, no windows, and you want some density to the walls if you can. So if there's like a bookshelf or clothes hanging up around you, that's going to help kill the sound and kill the reverb off of the things around you. And then, of course, quiet. So somewhere where you're not going to be hearing footsteps above you or sirens outside.
And turn the phone off.
Yeah.
We're chatting tonight about podcasting, and Amanda Cupido is our guest. She's the author of a book, Let's Talk Podcasting, The Essential Guide to Getting It Right. We're going to take a final break and come back with some concluding comments with Amanda in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960. We're chatting about podcasting with Amanda Cupido, who's written a book about podcasting. And Amanda, remind us, what's the name of the book?
It's Let's Talk Podcasting, The Essential Guide to Doing It Right. This is what it looks like.
Excellent. And where can we find it?
You can go to letstalkpodcasting.com and you can see it's on Amazon Indigo. And you can also send me a note directly and I can mail you a signed copy.
Awesome. Well, that sounds like a good idea. I might take advantage of that.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. I'm a little bit older than you, maybe a year or two, or a decade or two, or a generation or two. I'm not sure which. I grew up listening to Larry King, and I desperately wanted to be Larry King. And Larry King had the opportunity to interview such an incredible, breadth of different individuals. But he never, at least I don't know if he ever had a point of view. The guy that I like on TV now, not necessarily a podcast, I can mention some other podcast people, but the guy that I like on TV today the most is Chris Cuomo, because he always has a point of view. And he interviews people really well, but then he finishes most of his sessions with his closing argument, and he has a point of view. The gentleman on radio in Canada that I thought did it the best was frankly John Tory at 1010 that had the afternoon drive home. Similarly, he interviewed people, but he also had his own point of view, which is why I think people wanted to listen to him, to hear what his point of view was. How do you become, in today's world, Larry King or the John Tory drive home talk radio on 1010 or Chris Cuomo?
Great question. And a shout out to John Tory, because I did get to work with him when I was at News Talk 1010. So I'm glad you like the show. And he was amazing to work with. So that's the $1 million question, right? I mean, it's really hard, to be honest, like to find that fine balance between being able to interview someone and draw out their information and their story, but then also pepper it enough to have your own personality come through and to come through in a really authentic way. That's the crux of it. Like that's where the real gold is. A lot of people who will pepper their own thoughts or their own opinion, it almost comes across as scripted sometimes, especially for beginners, or forced. And the real beauty in being able to do this well, it does just take practice. Interviewing is tough. People think it's easy. Oh, it's just talking, but there is an art to doing a great interview, as I'm sure you even know, Brian. Like the way you've navigated this conversation with me, he's making it sound easy, but he has a lot of notes in front of him and he has a lot to cover in a short period of time. And so, I think there's this balance between trying to move through material and getting someone to speak and then also peppering it with your own. But one of the biggest pieces is being vulnerable, being able to be vulnerable and authentic. And that's what people really want from podcasts. And that's what we find in radio. There are some hosts that put on this like shtick or this personality, even just like the wacky names that FM radio hosts use. It's part of a persona that works on radio and like it has worked in the past, but it doesn't translate to podcasts. People are specifically going to podcasts because they want to get to know someone, they want the real deal, and they really want to feel like they're sitting in the car or sitting at home with that host, and having a friendly chat and like they know them. And so I think it comes down to being ready and willing to be vulnerable and sharing, and not just sharing for the sake of sharing or sharing to like play the victim in a story, but sharing in a like genuine, heartfelt way that makes sense with the topic, but still gives other people the opportunity to share and come alongside.
If I could add two more, because I think vulnerable and authentic are really helpful. But I think the other thing is people want truth. That whether it's, this common refrain of fake news that we hear, people really want information. They're desperate for information. And so I think that to the extent that you can provide true information, that's really helpful. And then I think people want to feel like you're actually interested in them. And so maybe that's the same as authentic. I'm not sure, but empathy, I guess, would be maybe the word that, I've had a lot of shows on COVID-19 and challenges and mental health and how people are dealing with it. I think people really want to know that you care about helping them in their daily lives, providing the information that they want or need, and that you're trying to give them some information that might actually help them because you like them and you're empathetic.
Listening is such an important element of this, right? People forget that you have to really listen to the person and respond. Don't just have a list of things you're going to work through and questions you want to ask. You got to really listen. And I think that's where a lot of people, they're nervous, they're in their head, they're planning their next question, they forget to listen. And like that's true hosts can listen, but also be planning at the same time. And one other thing I wanted to comment on, you said people want to learn facts. It's so true. Research has shown that people listen to podcasts equally because they want to learn and they want to be entertained. This is a special like two facts here where a lot of people might, watch Netflix because they want to zone out and they just want to be entertained, or they might go watch a documentary because they want to learn. And podcasters like this cool mix of the two. And so I definitely agree with the fact element that's proven through research.
We're chatting tonight with Amanda Cupido. She's the author of Let's Talk Podcasting, the essential guide to getting it right. Amanda, it's been a real pleasure meeting you and chatting with you tonight. We talked about authenticity. We talked about vulnerability. We talked about entertainment. We talked about getting facts. I think it's a great opportunity and a great opportunity to, in this world of social isolation, to not be socially isolated, to be maybe physically distant and physically isolated, but to actually reach out and touch people, at least virtually. So Amanda, thank you so much. This is the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on Saga 960. That's 960 AM on your AM dial, or you can stream me online at saga960am.ca, or you can get all my podcasts and video casts on my website, briancrombie.com. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.